Under the blazing African sun, beyond the dusty trails that twisted through endless savannas and clusters of ancient baobab trees, lay a village that people from neighboring lands called the Village of Echoes. To an outsider, it looked like any other settlement, with mud huts arranged in wide circles, reed roofs thatched tightly against rain, and smoke rising gently from cooking fires. Yet those who lived there knew it was no ordinary place. In this village, words themselves carried weight, far heavier than stones and sharper than spears. The villagers believed that every voice was not merely sound but spirit, and to speak was to send a fragment of one's soul into the air. Silence was never casual here, it was either sacred or dangerous. Children were raised on the belief that to misuse a word was to invite ruin, while to speak truth was to shape destiny. The marketplace of the village thrummed not only with trade but with voices that swirled together like a living wind. When a woman bargained for millet or a man praised the quality of a woven cloth, their tones carried more than commerce. They were affirmations of life itself. Old women told stories under the shade of the great Irako tree, their voices wrapping the listeners like protective charms. Hunters returning from the bush shared their tales and chants that ensured the spirits of the animals they slew would not rise against them. Even funerals were conducted with the certainty that the last words spoken over the dead would guide their spirits safely to the afterworld. To live in the Village of Echoes was to know that the tongue could heal or kill, and everyone carried that awareness with the gravity of religion. In this world, silence was an uneasy presence. At dawn, when the roosters crowed and the drums began their morning rhythm, silence was a mark of reverence, as the people acknowledged the rising sun and the gods who gave them life. But in other moments, when silence stretched too long between people, suspicion grew like thorns. A man who spoke too little was distrusted, for what secrets did he guard? A woman who held her tongue during disputes was feared, for surely she plotted with unseen forces. Even children were urged to speak often, to laugh and sing, because a silent child was said to attract wandering spirits. To remain without voice was to walk in shadow. Generations of elders reinforced this sacred relationship with sound by recounting stories of those who had misused it. There was the tale of the young warrior who boasted too loudly before a raid, drawing disaster upon his entire war band when spirits carried his arrogant words to the ears of enemies. There was the widow who whispered curses upon her neighbor, only to see her crops wither while her enemies' fields flourished. And there was also the revered story of the old seer whose single blessing, spoken in a voice cracked with age, brought rain after 7 years of drought. Each story taught that sound was alive. Voices were not to be wasted, for each carried consequence. This reverence for voice shaped every corner of life. Ceremonies of naming for infants were grand affairs where relatives sang the newborn's name into existence, believing the first echoes gave it strength. Lovers wooed not with gifts alone but with words so artful they could melt stone hearts. Arguments were settled by the balance of speech, where even a trembling but truthful tone could outweigh a louder, harsher one. To curse a person openly was akin to striking them, and forgiveness was always sought with chants and repeated apologies until the air felt cleansed. In such a society, the voice was not just flesh vibrating in air, it was a weapon, a shield, and a bridge between realms. Yet beneath this devotion lay a thread of unease, for power always invites fear. Whispered among the villagers were warnings that some voices were too dangerous, too sharp, and too full of spirit to be trusted. The elders claimed that certain people were born with voices that could command winds, break bones, or bend the will of others. Such gifts were rare but never celebrated, for they brought imbalance. Those touched by such power often ended tragically, either driven out, silenced, or cursed. These stories lingered like smoke, unspoken during daylight yet carried from one generation to the next in hushed tones. They kept the villagers both reverent and wary, always mindful that the line between blessing and curse was as thin as a spider's thread. Night in the Village of Echoes carried a different weight altogether. When the fires burned low and the sky glittered with ancestral stars, the world grew quiet, and every sound seemed to stretch farther than during the day. Crickets sang, owls hooted, and drums beat faintly from distant gatherings. But the silence between these sounds was never trusted. People avoided speaking in absolute darkness, for they believed words could travel into unseen realms, stirring forces best left asleep. Children were hushed and warned that if they spoke after midnight, the spirits of the forest would answer. In this balance of sound and silence, light and dark, the villagers built their lives. It was within this atmosphere of awe and dread for the spoken word that a girl named Luma was born, her gentle voice destined to draw admiration and envy alike. But before her story unfolded, the stage was already set by centuries of belief. In this village, a curse upon one's voice was not merely an affliction of the body, but a wound upon the soul. Every villager knew it, and it was this belief that made what happened to Luma not only believable but inevitable, for in the village of echoes, nothing was feared more than a voice turned against its own. Luma had been born beneath a sky heavy with rain, her first cries mingling with the patter of drops on the thatched roofs. From the moment she was swaddled in her mother's arms, the elders declared that her voice was touched by the spirits. It wasn't loud or commanding like the warriors, nor sharp and fiery like the market women's. Instead, it carried a softness that drew people closer, as if each word she spoke was a thread of silk gently laid across the ears of those who listened. Her mother often said that Luma's voice reminded her of the river at night, steady, flowing, and strangely comforting, even when the world felt uncertain. As she grew, that quality only deepened, and soon the villagers began to whisper about her gift. From childhood, she showed a tenderness that made her beloved by those around her. She fed stray goats scraps of yam when others would chase them away, and she was often found sitting with children younger than herself, singing lullabies until they drifted into sleep. Her laughter, though not loud, carried a melody that lifted moods like sunlight spilling over a dark path. Many believed that to spend even a short while in her company was to forget the heaviness of life. Luma never sought such attention, nor did she wield her charm with pride. Her kindness was instinctive, as natural as breathing. The elders, who valued voices more than jewels, spoke of her with admiration. One storyteller in particular, an old man named Bako, often said that her tongue was woven from water and moonlight. Whenever he shared tales under the great Irako tree, he would call on Luma to repeat certain lines, not because she remembered them better, but because her voice gave them life. When she spoke, even the wind seemed to pause, and children leaned in as though fearing to miss even a syllable. For a girl so young, to command such quiet awe was unusual, and though she remained humble, it was clear to everyone that her presence carried something rare. Yet Luma herself was never boastful. She preferred to blend into the rhythms of daily life, helping her mother grind maize, fetching water in clay pots balanced carefully on her head, and joining the women at the river to wash clothes. What set her apart was not only her voice but the gentleness with which she treated others. When arguments broke out among friends, she was the one to step in softly, speaking words that smoothed the air like oil poured over restless water. Her ability to ease anger with nothing but her tone made some whisper that she had been born under a star of peace. But in every place where light shines, shadows also gather. Not everyone viewed Luma with admiration alone. Her quiet grace and effortless charm stirred envy in those whose voices were harsher or whose tempers lacked her patience. Among them was her stepmother, who watched her with eyes that burned not with love but with something sharper, something dangerous. Though Luma did not yet see it, her innocence and the beauty of her voice would one day place her directly in harm's path, for gifts that inspire love can just as easily awaken hatred. The woman who became Luma's stepmother entered the household like a shadow creeping into a room at dusk. Her name was Nwoko, and though she arrived dressed in bright wrappers and with heavy beads around her neck, her heart was darker than the storm clouds that sometimes swallowed the sky. She had been widowed once before, and when she married Luma's father, many thought she had been given a chance to start anew. At first, she smiled and spoke sweetly, playing the role of the dutiful wife. But beneath the surface, envy already coiled in her, waiting for a reason to strike. That reason soon appeared in the form of Luma herself. Nwoko had never been admired for her looks. Her face was sharp, her eyes small and watchful, her lips quick to twist into scorn. Where others sang, her voice grated, carrying none of the warmth that Luma's carried so effortlessly. When she spoke in the market, people listened out of politeness rather than desire. All her life she had longed to be noticed, to hold sway over others with nothing more than her presence, but she remained in the background while others shone. Then she married into a home where a girl of tender years outshone her with every word, every laugh, every gentle gesture. It began with little things. When Luma fetched water, the women at the river praised how gracefully she walked, saying even the pot seemed lighter on her head. When she sang, children followed her as though enchanted, and elders nodded with satisfaction as if listening to an old song returned to life. Nwoko would stand nearby, her face fixed in a smile that did not reach her eyes, her teeth grinding behind closed lips. The more the villagers admired Luma, the more invisible Nwoko felt. She had thought marriage into Luma's household would give her the respect she had always craved, but instead she lived in the shadow of a girl whose gifts came without effort. Envy has a way of souring the spirit until every glance feels like an insult and every word of praise for another feels like a dagger. Nwoko's bitterness grew each day. At night, she lay awake beside her husband, seething at how he spoke gently of Luma's future, how he admired her kindness and the way her voice reminded him of her late mother. Nwoko's heart twisted with resentment, for no one had ever spoken of her that way. Her own voice was never compared to rivers or moonlight, her presence was never said to soothe. She could not stand it. Though she kept her hatred hidden behind a mask of civility, there were moments when her true nature flickered through. Her scoldings of Luma were sharper than necessary, her chores harsher, her punishments unjust. When no one watched, her eyes lingered on the girl with a venom that only jealousy could breed. The villagers, blinded by Luma's glow, did not notice. But those who looked closely might have seen the beginnings of a storm, for in Nwoko's heart envy was ripening into malice, and malice, when left to fester, always demands an outlet. Luma, innocent and radiant, would soon become the target of that darkness. One moonless night, when the rest of the village had long since fallen into slumber, Nwoko wrapped herself in a dark shawl and slipped out of her hut. Her footsteps were careful, almost cautious, but her heart throbbed with venomous intent. She carried with her a pouch filled with offerings, cowrie shells, a vial of palm oil, and a lock of Luma's hair she had stolen from a comb. Her destination was the edge of the forest, where a healer known only in whispers resided. This was no ordinary healer, not one who mixed herbs to cure fevers or stitched wounds. This was a man feared for his communion with shadows, a man people only sought when their hearts were desperate enough to bargain with curses. When she arrived, the healer was waiting as though he had sensed her coming. His hut reeked of bitter smoke, and charms dangled from the rafters, muttering against one another in the faint breeze. His eyes glimmered in the firelight like the eyes of a predator. "You seek to break what is whole," he rasped, taking the pouch from her hands. "You envy what you do not have." Nwoko did not deny it. She demanded that he silence Luma's voice, strip away the beauty that drew others to her. The healer accepted, though not without warning. To steal a voice is to wound the spirit. Such wounds ripple outward, and even you may drown in their echoes. But Nwoko, blinded by jealousy, cared nothing for warnings. She nodded fiercely, and the ritual began. The healer mixed Luma's hair with ash and oil, chanting words that twisted the air into something heavy. He spat into the fire, and the flames hissed, turning an eerie green. With each chant, Nwoko felt a thrill course through her veins, as though her bitterness had finally found shape. By the time she returned home, she knew in her bones that the curse had taken root. The next morning Luma woke as she always did, humming softly while fetching water. But when she greeted a neighbor with her gentle good morning, the words cracked painfully in her throat, breaking into silence. Confused, she tried again, but her voice came out as little more than a rasp. Panic welled within her as she clutched her throat, her heart racing. Throughout the day, whenever she attempted to speak, her voice faltered, withering as though strangled by unseen hands. By midday, even the smallest attempt at conversation ended in silence, her lips moving but only faint, broken breaths escaping. The villagers noticed quickly. Some laughed, thinking she was pretending. Others whispered that she must have offended the spirits. Luma's humiliation burned hotter than fire. She wanted to cry out, to explain, but each attempt only brought pain to her throat and mocking glances from those around her. By nightfall, she sat alone in her hut, tears streaking her cheeks, when she discovered something strange. In the thick darkness, when she whispered, the sound came. Soft, fragile, but there. It was not the radiant melody she once carried, but a faint echo of it, audible only to herself. Her curse was clear. By day she was voiceless, mocked and powerless, and by night her whispers lingered like secrets, unheard by those who mattered. It was a prison woven from envy, and she felt its chains tightening with every passing day. At first, the villagers treated Luma's faltering voice with curiosity. Some laughed when she tried to answer questions, her mouth moving but only broken sounds spilling out. Others tilted their heads, waiting for her voice to return as if it were a trick she was playing. But as days turned into weeks and her silence deepened, curiosity hardened into suspicion. In the village of echoes, where voices were sacred, a girl whose words could not take flight seemed unnatural, even dangerous. Whispers began to spread, whispers sharper than any blade. She must have angered the spirits, some muttered. Perhaps her mother's ghost is punishing her, others suggested. Each rumor added another stone to the wall that was slowly rising around Luma. Children, once eager to gather around her for songs and stories, now scattered when she appeared. They mimicked her silence cruelly, pressing fingers to their throats and opening their mouths without sound, laughing at her expense. Women at the river, who used to praise her grace and hum along to her songs, now fell silent when she approached, exchanging glances heavy with unease. Even the market, once filled with her cheerful greetings, turned cold. Sellers averted their eyes, fearing her broken voice might curse their trade. The wound cut deeper when her closest friends began to drift away. Kemi, who had grown up by her side, no longer sought her company. "It is not you," Kemi whispered one evening, unable to meet Luma's eyes, "but the others say you carry something unclean. If I stay too close, they will think the same of me." And with that, she left, leaving Luma staring into the dust, her heart heavier than the water pots she carried daily. Loneliness settled over her like a second skin, clinging no matter how she tried to shake it away. Even her father, though still loving, grew distant under Nwoko's constant murmurs. The stepmother planted poisonous seeds in his ear, that perhaps Luma had drawn the curse upon herself, that her strange condition might bring danger to the entire household. Luma noticed how his gaze grew clouded with worry when she tried to speak, how he sighed and turned away when neighbors came to whisper at the doorway. He still gave her food, still made sure she had a place to sleep, but the warmth between them cooled, leaving her adrift even in her own home. Nights became her only refuge. Alone in the dark, she whispered to herself, the faint sound a fragile reminder that she still existed. But what comfort was a voice no one else could hear? By day, the mocking eyes and cruel laughter chased her. By night, her whispers echoed into emptiness. The silence that surrounded her was no longer sacred but suffocating, pressing in on her from every direction. Once beloved for her gentle spirit, Luma now walked through the village like a ghost, unseen except when scorned. Her loneliness was no accident. It was the fruit of her stepmother's envy ripening bitterly with each passing day. That night, the air hung heavy and still, as though the world itself were holding its breath. Luma sat alone in her hut, staring at the faint glow of the dying fire. She had tried all day to speak, to force her voice into being, but only pain had answered. Her throat ached, her heart heavier than ever, and for a moment she wondered if silence would be her fate until death. When the fire finally guttered out, leaving her in complete darkness, she did what had become her only solace. She whispered to herself. But this time something was different. The air shifted, subtle at first, like the faint stir of wind through tall grass. Her own whisper seemed to carry farther than it should, curling around the room like smoke. Startled, she paused, her heart racing. Cautiously, she whispered again, a soft thread of sound barely louder than breath. The darkness stirred. The mat beneath her feet quivered, and from outside, she heard the dry leaves rattle though no breeze had touched them. She froze, her body trembling, then whispered once more, this time a question, "Who hears me?" The shadows thickened around her, and for an instant she felt as though unseen ears leaned close. It was terrifying and wondrous all at once. She had been cursed, but here in the deep night, her voice seemed alive, fuller than it had ever been in the day. The more she tested it, the stronger the reaction became. When she whispered a melody her mother once sang, the air itself seemed to hum with her, carrying the faintest vibration through the hut. When she whispered a command, "Be still," the small flame of a rekindled ember extinguished at once, plunging her back into blackness. And when she whispered her sorrow, pouring out all the loneliness and pain she had endured, the wind outside rose suddenly, a hollow moan that echoed her grief. It was as though the night listened not only to her words but to the emotions behind them, weaving them into the world. Even the animals seemed to notice. A stray dog that often prowled near her hut crept closer but did not bark. It sat quietly, ears perked, as if listening to a sermon only it could understand. An owl perched on the rafters above, blinking slowly, unafraid of her presence. These creatures, who never paid her mind before, now lingered in the silence that followed her whispers, as though drawn to her unseen power. Luma felt a shiver run through her. What was once a curse now revealed itself as something else, a secret gift, hidden in the folds of darkness. For the first time since her voice had been stolen, hope stirred within her. She realized she had not been silenced completely, she had been shifted into another realm, one where her words carried weight beyond the ordinary. Perhaps her stepmother thought she had stolen Luma's power, but in truth she had only changed its form. Alone in the dark, with the night as her witness, Luma began to understand that silence was not her prison, it was her doorway. It began as an accident. One restless night, Luma sat outside her hut, the moon hidden behind thick clouds and the village swallowed in near total darkness. She whispered to herself, her voice curling through the air like smoke. If only they knew the truth, she sighed, her heart aching from the cruelty she endured. To her surprise, the words seemed to drift farther than intended, carried by the unseen currents of night. From across the compound, she heard the hushed voices of two men plotting to steal goats from a neighbor. Their whispers tangled with hers, and suddenly, without meaning to, her own voice rose into their space, echoing their plan back at them. Startled, the men fled, convinced the spirits had overheard their scheme. The next day, when the theft did not occur, the villagers muttered that Luma had been the cause, though no one dared ask how. Soon more incidents followed. One evening, she whispered her pain into the darkness. "Why must lies poison my life?" The words seemed to drift into the hut where her stepmother sat, boasting to a neighbor about her piety. But the neighbor heard Luma's faint voice instead, accusing Nwoko of deceit. Shocked, the woman spread the tale, and whispers about Nwoko's dishonesty began to ripple through the community. Luma herself had not meant for it to happen, yet her words, spoken softly into the night, traveled like arrows to hidden truths. There were other times when her whispers seemed to reach beyond the present into the shadow of what was to come. She once murmured, "The storm is coming," though the skies had been clear. By morning, rains pounded the village in a sudden downpour, flooding the paths and scattering livestock. Another time she whispered of a broken gourd spilling water, and the next day, a young bride's ceremonial pot shattered during her wedding procession. These strange foretellings unsettled the villagers, who began to look at Luma with wary eyes. She had gone from an object of pity to something far more complicated, an enigma who spoke softly in the dark but whose words carried truths no one wished to face. The more her whispers revealed, the more fear took root. Mothers pulled their children away when she passed, muttering prayers under their breath. Men who once mocked her now avoided her gaze, afraid that one stray whisper might expose their secrets. Even those who admired her voice before began to treat her with caution, torn between awe and dread. Yet none could deny the strange power of her whispers. Too many coincidences had piled upon one another. Luma's voice, broken by day, had become something unearthly by night. Alone, she felt the burden grow heavier. She had not sought this gift, nor did she relish the fear it brought. But somewhere deep within, she sensed that her whispers were not meant to torment her, they were meant to unravel something greater. The village had long thrived on voices, but her voice now carried the kind of truth that could not be silenced, no matter how much others wished it so. The stepmother, once so confident in her cruelty, began to feel the soil beneath her feet shifting. The curse she had spoken over Luma was supposed to silence her forever, a punishment meant to strip the girl of her dignity and her place among the villagers. Yet, instead of burying her in shame, the whispers that crept from Luma's lips in the dead of night had begun to spread through the community like wildfire. At first, people dismissed them as coincidences, strange murmurs born of fear and superstition. But when Luma's whispers revealed truths no one else could have known, when they carried predictions that came to pass, fear began to nest in the hearts of the people. And no one felt this fear more deeply than the stepmother herself. Each day she found herself haunted by Luma's quiet presence. Though the girl rarely looked at her, the stepmother felt exposed in her gaze, as if the whispers might at any moment spill her secrets into the night air for all to hear. She would lie awake, clutching her chest, wondering if her sins, those buried beneath years of deceit and cruelty, would one day rise like smoke from Luma's lips. Already, murmurs had started among the villagers. They recalled how the stepmother had married quickly after Luma's father's death, how she had grown wealthier while others suffered lean seasons, how she often visited strange places under the cover of darkness. Things once overlooked were now held in sharp suspicion, and every time Luma's whispers floated through the village, eyes turned toward her with growing doubt. The stepmother tried to laugh it off, to act as though nothing had changed, but unease clung to her like a second skin. When she walked through the market, she felt the weight of stares pressing against her back. Women who once greeted her with smiles now whispered behind cupped hands, and men who once respected her voice now avoided her altogether. In her own home, the air seemed restless. Cups rattled, doors creaked at night, and she wondered if it was Luma's unseen power seeping through the cracks, reminding her that her own walls could not contain her guilt. Her fear grew so sharp that she began to avoid the girl altogether. She no longer dared to mock her broken speech or force her into silence, for the thought of those whispers turning against her was unbearable. Every accidental sound from Luma's lips seemed heavy with hidden meaning, and the stepmother's heart pounded as though the girl had spoken directly of her crimes. She could feel the distance widening between herself and the villagers, and though she tried to tighten her grip, power was slipping from her hands like water. For the first time, the stepmother, so ruthless and unyielding, was truly afraid, not just of the girl she had cursed, but of what that curse had awakened. It was no longer Luma who seemed powerless, it was she who trembled in the shadows, hunted by whispers she could not silence. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the steady chorus of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves carried by the wind. Beneath the pale glow of the moon, the villagers gathered in a wide circle, their faces etched with unease, their torches flickering like restless spirits. At the center stood the elders, cloaked in long robes, their expressions grim as they called for order. The whispers about Luma had grown too strong, too dangerous to ignore. Some believed she was blessed with a gift from the unseen world, while others muttered that she carried a curse that would doom them all. Fear, as always, demanded a reckoning. Luma stood on the edge of the circle, her heart pounding as dozens of eyes bore into her. She had never felt so exposed, so small, yet so strangely powerful at the same time. 4 days, her whispers had unsettled the village, secrets revealed, lies undone, truths no one wanted spoken aloud. She had not sought this gift, nor this burden, yet here she was, summoned like a criminal awaiting judgment. The moonlight bathed her in silver, making her look otherworldly, and though she trembled inwardly, she lifted her chin with quiet defiance. Her stepmother sat among the crowd, trying to mask her fear with false composure. Every flicker of torchlight seemed to illuminate her guilt, every glance seemed to question her integrity. She could feel the weight of suspicion pressing on her, though she dared not move or speak. She knew too well that the very whispers she had wished to silence now had the power to unearth her darkest sins. The eldest of the council stepped forward, leaning heavily on his staff, his eyes sharp despite the years clouding his sight. "Child," he said, his voice echoing into the night, "you have been accused of bringing unease to this village. Your whispers in the dark stir the winds, move shadows, and reveal what was meant to be hidden. Tonight, before your people, you must show us the truth. Are your whispers a gift from the spirits, or a curse to bring ruin?" The murmurs that followed were thick with tension. Some villagers nodded eagerly, eager for proof, while others whispered prayers under their breath, fearful of what might come. The air was charged as if the very earth held its breath, waiting. Luma swallowed hard, her palms damp with sweat. She wanted to run, to vanish into the night, but something deep within her told her this was a moment she could not escape. Slowly, she stepped into the circle, the villagers parting reluctantly to let her through. The firelight danced on her face, casting shadows that made her seem both fragile and untouchable. The elders raised their hands for silence. "Speak," the eldest commanded. "Let the night decide." Luma closed her eyes, drawing in a long breath. The darkness behind her lids was vast, endless, and waiting. When she opened her mouth, her whisper was soft, barely audible, yet it seemed to ripple through the air like a wave. The torches flickered violently, the wind stirred, and the villagers leaned in with wide eyes. Her voice slithered into the night, carrying with it something that was not entirely her own. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending and swaying as though listening. The rustling trees grew still, animals nearby fell silent, and for a moment, the entire world seemed bound by her words. Then her whisper revealed something, a secret buried deep in the village. A name was spoken, hushed and trembling, and immediately one man among the crowd gasped, his face draining of color. A hidden betrayal had been unearthed, and the villagers turned toward him with shock and anger. The circle erupted in chaos. Some shouted that Luma was a witch, others cried that she was blessed by the ancestors, while still others stood frozen, unable to deny the truth they had just witnessed. The elders banged their staffs on the ground, demanding order, but the unrest spread like fire. Luma stood silently, her chest rising and falling, her whisper lingering in the air like smoke. She had done nothing but speak, yet the weight of her power had shifted the village forever. All eyes were upon her, not with the gaze of mere curiosity, but with the heavy burden of judgment. The night, it seemed, had only begun its reckoning. Would you like me to expand the next section, 10, to 600 words instead of 500 so the tension builds more sharply toward the climax? The air at the gathering was thick with suspicion, and the firelight flickered across the stern faces of the elders, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like accusing fingers. Luma stood before them, her heart pounding in her chest as if echoing the drumbeat of fate itself. The villagers had gathered close, their whispers swirling like restless winds. Everyone waited for her to speak, to prove whether the whispers she carried were a curse meant to destroy them or a gift meant to reveal what had long been buried in silence. Her stepmother's sharp eyes glared from the crowd, but even she could not hide the tremor in her hands. At first, Luma hesitated, her lips trembling, unsure if she should release the secrets that weighed heavy on her chest. The night was silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Then, in a voice barely above a breath, she whispered into the stillness. The words rolled out softly, like an unseen tide that could not be stopped. Her whispers were not loud, yet they carried with uncanny clarity, slipping into every ear as though the night itself conspired to spread them. And with each word the crowd shifted uneasily. She spoke of the missing grain that had long plagued the village during the dry seasons, revealing that it was not the spirits who had taken them, but one of the elders himself, hoarding it in secret to trade with outsiders. Gasps rose from the people, their eyes turning sharply toward the man who now lowered his head in shame. But Luma did not stop there. Her whispers deepened, uncovering stories that no one dared speak aloud. She revealed how a mother's child had not fallen ill by fate but had been poisoned out of jealousy. She uncovered the theft of a hunter's tools, stolen not by strangers but by a neighbor pretending to mourn alongside him. Each secret cut through the air like a blade, and each truth stirred the crowd into disbelief and fury. Murmurs turned into cries as villagers turned to look at one another, trust cracking and falling apart like clay pots hitting the ground. The elders tried to silence her, raising their voices above the restless crowd, but her whispers seemed unstoppable now, flowing as if carried by something greater than her will. She spoke of alliances made in secret, of promises broken under the veil of night. Then, with a trembling breath, she unveiled the most dangerous truth of all, that even the council of elders who demanded obedience and claimed purity, had struck hidden deals with enemies, exchanging the safety of their people for personal gain. For a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. The fire crackled louder, the villagers gasped as though the ground itself had shifted beneath them, and the elders stood frozen, their power suddenly fragile and exposed. The night no longer belonged to the council nor to fear. It belonged to Luma's whispers, and in that moment the truth, long buried, had finally found its voice. The night of the council had ended in uproar. Whispers still clung to the air like smoke after a great fire. Luma had revealed truths that no one dared speak aloud, truths that had festered in the dark corners of the village like rot in a granary. Faces once filled with scorn now carried fear, awe, and uncertainty. Yet among the murmurs and shifting eyes, one face burned with fury, the face of Luma's stepmother. The stepmother had expected the council to end with Luma shamed, cursed, perhaps even cast into the forest to wither and vanish. Instead, her whispers had lifted the veil from many hidden sins, and now suspicion turned like a torchlight in the dark. And the stepmother, who had always ruled her household with cruelty and cunning, now felt the eyes of her neighbors crawling over her like ants on spilled honey. Days passed and the whispers of the night spread. The hunter whose snares had stolen goats was confronted. The elder who had sold land in secret to outsiders was forced to confess. Families once silent about betrayals now argued openly, fueled by Luma's revelations. The village, shaken to its roots, began to fear not only what Luma might say next but also what secrets might still be lurking among them. The stepmother tried to silence the rising tide. She went from hut to hut, speaking venom with honeyed words. "Do not believe her," she hissed to the wives who gathered at the well. "She is cursed, filled with the spirits of the restless dead. Her words are not truth, but poison meant to divide us. She is a child abandoned by fortune," she told the men at the fields. "Her whispers are tricks, designed to make her seem powerful when she is nothing but a broken girl." But the more she spoke, the more the people remembered the look of terror in her eyes that night when Luma's voice floated across the council circle. They remembered how she had fidgeted, how sweat had beaded on her brow. They began to wonder, what was she hiding? At home, the stepmother's fear grew heavy. Every time Luma opened her mouth to whisper, she felt her heart pound as though it were about to burst. At night, she lay awake, trembling at the faint sound of Luma breathing in the next room. She dreamt of shadows gathering around her bed, whispering her own secrets back to her, secrets she had buried deep. Her envy of Luma's late mother. Her cruel joy in watching the girl's suffering. The curse she had spoken in bitterness, binding Luma's tongue so that she might never rise above her. The stepmother had believed her curse would bury the girl forever, silencing her spirit. But instead, it had sharpened Luma's whispers into blades of truth. And now those blades threatened to pierce her own heart. The village's unease grew until the elders called for another gathering. This time, no feast was laid out, no drums were beaten. The air was heavy, tense, as the villagers gathered under the ancient baobab tree. Torches lined the circle, their flames bending with the night wind. Shadows stretched long and thin, and the eyes of the people gleamed with expectation. The elders spoke. "We have seen that the girl's whispers carry weight. They have revealed corruption, betrayal, and theft. Yet the question remains, what is their source? Are they gifts of the ancestors or curses from spirits? Tonight we must learn the final truth. The crowd murmured. Some looked upon Luma with reverence, others with suspicion, and still others with fear. The stepmother stepped forward, her voice trembling but fierce. "This is foolishness," she cried. "You let a child's broken tongue lead you astray. She has bewitched you, poisoned you with lies. Do not let her divide our people." But the villagers did not answer. Their eyes were fixed on Luma. Luma stood at the center of the circle, her hands clasped together, her head bowed slightly. The firelight danced across her face, revealing neither pride nor fear, but a calm strength born of suffering. When she lifted her eyes, she looked not at the elders, not at the villagers, but directly at her stepmother. A hush fell. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. Luma's lips parted, and the faintest whisper spilled into the air. Though her voice was soft as a rustle of grass, every ear strained to hear. She whispered of envy, of a woman who had hated her husband's first wife, who had rejoiced when she fell ill, who had taken her place with a smile but carried poison in her heart. The villagers gasped. All knew that Luma's stepmother had once been only a servant in the household, rising to mistress after the first wife's death. Luma whispered of cruelty, of nights when she was forced to sleep hungry, when her stepmother struck her for the smallest mistakes, when her clothes were taken and her dignity ground into the dust. Mothers in the crowd clutched their children tighter, shame burning in their chests for not having protected the girl sooner. Then Luma whispered of the curse. Her words painted the night with terror. She told of how her stepmother had gone to the old grove, how she had called upon spirits of malice, how she had spoken words that bound Luma's tongue and twisted her speech. She whispered how the curse was meant to break her spirit, to silence her forever. The stepmother's face turned ashen. She opened her mouth to shout, to deny, but the words stuck in her throat. Her own guilt rose like bile, choking her. The villagers erupted in cries. She cursed the child. She is the true poison. Her whispers are not lies but truth. The elders turned to the stepmother, their eyes burning with anger. "Is this true?" they demanded. But before the stepmother could speak, Luma whispered one final truth, the darkest of all. She whispered of betrayal. She revealed how her stepmother, driven by envy and greed, had once sought to sell the village's secrets to outsiders, to gain favor and wealth. She whispered how her stepmother's lies had caused strife between families, how her schemes had brought quiet suffering to many. The crowd roared. Torches wavered as people shouted and pointed. The stepmother fell to her knees, her hands clawing at the earth as though it might swallow her whole. "No," she screamed. "Lies. They are lies." But the people no longer believed her. They had seen too much, heard too much. The whispers had peeled away her mask, leaving only her true face for all to see. The elders decreed that the stepmother would be cast out. She was stripped of her place, her home, her standing. None would offer her food or shelter. She was banished beyond the forest, where her whispers of malice would fade into the night. As she was dragged away, her cries filled the air, shrieks of anger, of fear, of hatred. But no one turned to help her. Not even the women she once charmed with gossip, nor the men she tried to sway with lies. She was alone as she had once made Luma alone. When the council ended, silence settled upon the village. Luma stood beneath the baobab tree, her whispers still lingering like the echo of a sacred song. The people looked upon her with new eyes, not of mockery but of reverence. Children clung to their mothers and asked if she was blessed by the ancestors. The elders bowed their heads, humbled by the truths she had spoken. But Luma did not smile. She did not bask in triumph. Instead, she looked to the stars above, her whispers now a prayer. For though her stepmother had fallen, Luma knew the burden of truth was heavy, and her voice was not a gift of ease, but of responsibility. And so, the stepmother's fall became a tale told for generations. A story of how envy and cruelty turn back upon their owner, how curses can become blessings, and how even the faintest whisper can carry the weight of justice. For in that village, no one forgot the night when whispers toppled lies, and truth found its voice through a broken tongue.